Hi, everyone. Happy New Year, and welcome back to the How Did We Not Know That podcast. My name's Jack.
And I'm Nat.
And today, Nat will be starting us off for 2021 with a new topic of her choosing.
Yeah, I know I say this like every time, but I'm really excited about this topic today because it's not something I would normally research on my own free time about. Today I'm talking about the Russo-Finnish Wars. So, Finland's wars with the Soviet Union. Okay, so let me backtrack. Let me give you the whole background. I got a book for myself for Christmas, and I started reading a new book. It's called Upheaval: Turning Points for Nations in Crisis by Jared Diamond. And he talks about 7 different countries that have gone through extreme, times of crises and how they changed, right? And chapter 1 talked about Finland, and I was like, what? I don't know about you, Jack, but in my head, I was like, Finland, it's cold, and they're so peaceful and nice there. What is your view? What is your thoughts on Finland?
Yeah, well, I stereotype Scandinavia, which I probably shouldn't. And one of my good friends is from Sweden, and so she has told me that Sweden usually stays neutral out of wars because they don't have a very strong army. So that's why you never really hear about Sweden in World Wars One and Two. So I just kind of paired up Finland with them. But you're telling me Finland had a war with Russia, so or the Soviet Union. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Yeah, no, when I was doing my research, I really realized all these biases I had against Scandinavian countries. I was like, wow, in my head, they were all very similar, which is not true at all. Finland actually has a very violent and tragic history, and they had quite a few wars. Today I will be covering 3 wars, but mostly just one, but I'm going to be covering Finland's contested history with the Soviet Union. So before we start this episode, we'd like to give a quick shout out to our newest patron. We just like to give a huge thank you to Isaac, our latest patron. Thank you so much for all of your support, and to all of our other patrons. We really appreciate all of you so much. It means so much to us. We get so excited to hear from you guys. So yeah, thanks so much, Isaac.
We love that interaction. Send us emails, give us thumbs up, ratings, things like that. Tweet us. We love it all.
Yeah, check out you can support us through Patreon at HDWNKT, or just send us an email. We love to hear your thoughts. Yeah, I'll just get right into it. So Finland, in order to understand Finland's identity and their foreign policy strategy, you have to understand their geography. So they're a Scandinavian country. They're located in Eastern Europe. Finland borders Sweden to the west, Norway to the north, and Russia to the east. So they're surrounded by these countries, and they share a really long border with Russia. And actually, okay, so I'm going to say this so many times, but there's so many things I did not know about Finland. But yeah, apparently in the century before World War I, Finland was actually an autonomous part of Russia. It wasn't an independent nation. So it had it was not an independent country, which is so crazy to think about, that it was part of Russia. Because in my head, they're very different countries.
Yeah. Sorry, what was the year on that?
So it was just before World War I. But then in 1917, when the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia broke out, Finland declared its independence. They were like, you guys seem like you're you're struggling a little bit. We're just going to dip out while you guys work this out. But shortly after this, Finland breaks out into its own civil war. So there was a Finnish civil war between communist red and then conservative whites. So the White Party, they won this civil war, And it was really, they took it really personally. It was really gruesome. And, like, you kind of see this all around the world whenever there's, like, civil wars between, like, communists versus, like, more conservative political groups. They don't really let the losing group, they don't let them off very easily. They take it really personally. So after the White Party won, they shot nearly 8,000 members of the Red Party, just because they were like, we don't want communism at all in our country, and we don't want you, like, spreading ideologies to anyone, so, like, you just, yeah, they killed them. And then 20,000 Red Party members died of starvation and disease in concentration camps in Finland.
Oh no, they put them in concentration camps?
Yeah, so it was, like, really awful and really horrifying. And actually, another, like, crazy surprising fact, so as measured by percentage of a national population killed per month, the Finnish Civil War was actually the world's most deadly conflict until the Rwandan genocide in 1994. So
wow.
It was because Finland's population was very small. At the time, it was around 3.7 million people. So many people died in the Civil War. And this is really important. So I'm not focusing on the Civil War today, but it's important to know about because memories of this Civil War created, like, this huge fear of communism within Finland. And they were also really scared of the Soviet Union because Finland's so tiny and Russia is so huge. And so they're like, oh, I don't really like what's going on over there. But yeah, so before World War II and before World War I, Finland was very poor and it really didn't receive a lot of attention outside of Europe. No one was really invested in the country that much, and the economy was mainly focused on agriculture and forest products. And it was a liberal social democracy, but it also had to maintain a relationship with the Soviet Union, and today it has to maintain a relationship with Russia. So it's in terms of, like, foreign policy strategy, it's a really interesting country because its views are so different compared to its neighbor Russia, but they still need to get along. So I don't know. We'll get into it at the end, but I think it's really interesting to study. Okay, so now I'm going to get into what is known as the Winter War. So this is before World War II, and this is Finland's first conflict with the Soviet Union. So basically what was happening is it was after World War I, and the year is 1939, and Joseph Stalin is obviously, like, the leader of the Soviet Union, and he wanted to expand his influence all over Eastern Europe. He wanted more territory, more power, because he was really worried. His main concern with Finland was that there would be a German attack through Finland. Like, Finland would allow German troops to come and then infiltrate through the Finnish-Soviet Union border. Because, and again, another geographical point that's important to realize, is that have you heard of Leningrad? It's like the town.
No, I
Leningrad.
haven't.
Okay, it was like today it's known as St. Petersburg, but in the Soviet Union they called it Leningrad, and it's really close to the Finnish border. So, like, it'd be really easy to attack if you just cross the border and then you go. It's like a huge city. So they were really scared of a German attack through Finland. And so Stalin gives an ultimatum to 4 Baltic countries. So it's Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Finland. And he was basically like, you guys need to, like, surrender yourselves to me and give me, like, your territory, give me your armies, or else we're gonna, like, occupy you by force. And specifically for Finland, they were like, okay, we, like, our border between Finland and Russia we want it to be moved back 16 miles along what is known as the Karelian Isthmus. Karelian Isthmus. This is going to be really important. I'm going to talk about it a lot. He just wanted the border to be pushed back so it could create a buffer zone around Leningrad. And yeah, so basically there's more space. They're 16 miles farther from Leningrad. So in case of an attack.
So push the border into Finland.
Yeah. And he's like, this will be Russia. So we're just going to take some of your territory just to protect us. And they also wanted the Finns to hand over a lot of their islands that they had in the Gulf of Finland. And yeah, so they could like construct naval bases there. And actually the Soviet Union offered some Russian territory in return, but it wasn't very like useful. And basically the Finns were really suspicious of Stalin, and they eventually turned his offer down because, first of all, they were really they didn't trust him. They thought that like, okay, today he's asking only for these 16 miles, but then if we give him that, he's just going to keep asking for more and more, and eventually we won't be an independent country anymore. He's going to take over the whole country. And they also thought that he was bluffing. They were like, okay, you're already involved in all these military conflicts around the world. There's no way he's going to like go to war with us, this tiny country. And then finally they thought that, okay, if the war were to break out, all of our allies would come help us because people, like all these European countries were really scared of the Soviet Union. So they're like, okay, we're going to be okay. So they were, out of those 4 countries that they got that had that ultimatum, Finland was the only country to say, actually, no, like, we're not going to take your deal. The other 3 countries agreed with Stalin's offer. And so on November 30th, 1939, after many failed negotiations, the Soviet Red Army launched an invasion on Finland with 500,000 troops. So before I get into like the details of the war, I gotta like talk about numbers because it's so crazy how much Russia outnumbered Finland at the time. So again, at this point in time, Finland's population is 3.7 million. The Soviet Union's population is about 150 million. And so they're like, it's so much bigger. The Soviet Union attacked Finland with only 4 of its armies, and that is roughly 500,000 men, while Finland used all 9 of its divisions, and that was only 120,000 men. So, again, like they're like outnumbered, and the Soviet Union had, obviously, like they had way better technology than them, they had way better weapons, and also
really?
A lot
The
more...
Soviet Union had a lot better technology?
Yeah, because at this time, Finland is just like an agriculture economy. They don't really have a lot of conflicts. They just had a civil war, but like everyone in the country like was like ill-equipped.
Yeah. Also, what's the time span between the Civil War and now this event?
The Civil War was following. It was like around like 1918. It was at the start of World War I.
Okay.
And then it only lasted a few years. Yeah, so now we jump like to World War II. So it's 1939.
Okay. That's not a ton of time to recover from the first
really
war.
Not. Yeah, it's really not. It's like still fresh in their minds. And again, they're like so scared of communism still.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so the Soviet Union has so many more like tanks and artillery, all that stuff. But the one thing Finland had was the advantage of being on home turf, because they like really, this is like my favorite, this is so interesting. They really utilized Finland's like terrain. I didn't realize Finland's winters are worse than Russia's winters, because apparently like all these Soviet soldiers came to Finland and it's December when they're coming. And so it's like freezing. That's why it's called the Winter War. And yeah, they were just like not prepared for how cold it was going to be and how snowy. And so basically what Finland, their whole like way of thinking in the war was, okay, there's no way we're going to defeat the Soviet Union. However, we're going to make this as slow and painful and as costly for Russians as possible. So they just wanted to, like, really, they didn't want it to be an easy win. But they knew that they weren't going to win in the end. So,
oh, no. What an awful feeling. You're going to send troops in and you know they're going to get massacred.
But they were so, like, they were willing to risk all their lives for their country's independence, and they didn't want to, be bullied so easily, you know? So it's just, like, it's really, like, honorable seeing, even though they knew they weren't going to win, they were like, we don't want to give up easily. And so the Finnish army, they hid behind, they, like, created a network of trenches and all these concrete bunkers along the Caroline Isthmus. So this is, like, the border. This is what they're fighting over. The whole war is just this one border. And they would hide in these, like, little trenches, and they would attack the Soviet tanks, so then they couldn't cross. Yeah, so they're hiding in these trenches, and they're trying to attack Soviet tanks. So what they would do is they would literally have guys, like, come up, run up next to the tanks, and stick logs in the wheels, so then the tanks would get stuck. Then they would go take their guns, literally put their guns, like, down the barrel of the tank and start shooting in hopes that they would shoot, like, the guy maneuvering it inside. And
that's crazy.
Like, they're literally, like, daredevils. And I read in my book, Upheaval, that, like, mortality rate? Yeah, is that what you call it? Mortality rate?
Yeah, mortality rate.
Yeah, it was 70% for the people who were, like, the tank attackers. Because it's so
for the
dangerous.
Soviet Union.
Yeah, no, like, Finnish people. Like, 70% of the guys who went...
they would...
Yeah, a lot of times...
Those people would die if they had to go shoot. Yeah, because you're going to the nozzle of the tank.
Yeah, but, like, they would succeed in slowing down the tanks or, like, stopping the tanks, but it was pretty much, like, a one-way mission. But, yeah, it's crazy.
Oh, no.
And then, this part, I had no idea about this part. How did I not know that? The Finns invented the Molotov cocktail. They used it, so basically a Molotov cocktail is like a glass bottle filled with gasoline and tar, and then you light it on fire, and you throw it, and it's like a bomb. It's like a really cheap and easy to make bomb. Thought this was a drink.
I was so confused.
They were like, yeah, let's party. No.
I know, I was like, I don't really drink alcohol. Like, what is it?
Like, why is this important? No, yeah. They would use it. They're, like, really cheap and easy to make bombs. But yeah, and so they would use it, they would throw them at tanks and, like, try to get it inside the nozzle to blow up the tanks. Because they didn't have, like, real bombs or missiles, you know? So they invented this. So
they didn't have real bombs or missiles? And they were just going in that close to the tank?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I guess, yeah. Well, they were, like, hiding in the forest because Finland is, like, all these, like, mountainous, snowy forests. And so, actually, yeah, okay, they were just really resourceful and really smart because they knew how to work with the land. So this is so fun to picture in your mind, but basically Finnish ski troops, they used the hills to, like, conduct hit and run attacks on, like, little, like, Soviet soldier camps. So they would literally go skiing and, like, just shoot them on their skis and then, like, fly away.
That's so impressive.
Right?
I have not skied yet, but I just tried snowboarding, and that was very difficult. So that's amazing that they were able to use that.
Right? I mean, yeah, if you have so much experience skiing all the time, like, that's such a smart way because
it's cool. Like, it reminds me of, like, guerrilla warfare in Vietnam.
Yeah, this is very much like, okay, using the land and your resources to your advantage. Because also, another, like, fun thing to picture in your head, so the Soviet Unions were using tanks as transportation and trucks, but those were really noisy and they needed like gasoline, like you needed fuel, and then you also had to rely on roads, which there weren't a lot of roads in Finland at the time, especially in that isolated area. And so the Finnish army used reindeer to like transport their materials through the forest because it was a lot quieter, and you could like cut through the forest easily. So another thing where it's just like, wow, that's like so clever. And yeah, okay, so at the beginning of the war, the Soviet troops showed up in these dark uniforms that like was just traditional like custom uniforms, you know? But it was the winter, everything was snow, so they stood out like crazy, and it was so easy to target them. And so the Finnish troops were like wearing all white, and you basically couldn't see them, you know, like in the snow. So it was really easy for them to like hide in the little snowy forest. Yeah. And then another tactic that they would use, they relied on snipers a lot. So like they would go find Soviet troops, because the Soviet troops were using fire. Like they made like bonfires at their camps, but the Finnish troops had electric heaters, and that way you didn't have to see smoke, and like you couldn't smell it, you know? So it was easier for the Finnish troops to hide. So they would go out and look for the Soviet troops and find their fires, and then they would watch them until they could identify like who were the leaders of the group. Because, okay, side note, the Finnish army had like a decent amount of guns, but they didn't have like any ammunition. So they were told like, don't waste a single bullet. So they couldn't just shoot the whole camp. So they would like watch and then try to figure out who were the leaders of the troop, and then they would like assassinate all the leaders, and then just leave like all the regular soldiers to be like, what do we do now? Like,
wow.
We don't know what to do.
You know what I'm thinking of? Do you remember that? What's the Olympic sport where they ski and then they basically do a sniper shot at a target and then they keep skiing?
Yeah.
Are they really good at that? Does
Did they
Finland like
invent
take gold for that every year or what?
Did it like start after this war? People were like, hey, that was actually kind of fun. We should do that for sport. Yeah. Yeah. What is that called? I'll have to look it up, but that wouldn't surprise me if
whenever I see that event, I'm like, wow, that looks so challenging. You have to do so much. You have to be really fast and win the race, and you have to ski really well, and you have to shoot well.
Yeah, like after you're like exhausted, you have to like balance and like have a steady aim on your gun. I don't know. But yeah. So they had all these like smart tactics in the war. Oh, also, I should have mentioned this earlier, but temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter. So it was very cold, but people in Finland were used to it. And the Soviet soldiers were not used to it. So that's when you know it's really cold. It's when Russians...
I guess it depends where you're from in the Soviet Union. I think Serbia is really cold, but maybe the rest is more.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Despite all of these clever tactics, in the end, the Finnish troops were just like no match for the number of Soviet troops, because like the Finnish troops were fighting extremely hard and they were really clever, but the Soviet army had so many people, so it was just like there was no chance for them to win. And so Finland started asking all of its allies like, hey, we're losing this war, can you please help? And realistically, Finland only had hope of receiving help from Sweden, Germany, Britain, France, and the US. Those were like the most, out of all European countries, those were the ones that were most likely to support them, right?
Wait, but they wanted help from Germany? Isn't this...
Yeah, because it's during... Okay, yeah, so now we're going to get into that, because it's during World War II, so it's Germany versus the Soviet Union, and they're, like, at ends. And so they're like, hey, Germany, we know you hate the Soviet Union, and you're also thinking of, like, invading the country, so why don't you help us out? But, okay, so before this... Germany and the Soviet Union had just signed a non-aggression pact saying that, like, hey, we're not going to fight each other. So Germany was like, sorry, we can't help you. And then Sweden and the US were like, hey, we said we were going to be neutral, so we can't help you. And Britain and France were already really struggling with fighting against Germany. So they're like, we can't help you. We're too preoccupied.
Wait, Germany signed a non-aggression agreement with the Soviet Union before the end of World War II?
Yeah, and then they broke it. And then Hitler broke it.
Oh,
when
they
they invaded the Soviet Union. He was like...
Okay, that's key information. I was like, no way, because I'm pretty sure they kept fighting. Okay.
No, it's the Molotov something pact. I just read it earlier today, but Hitler broke that. Okay, so then the Finnish are not doing well in the war, and it's February 1940, so only 3 months after the war started. And the Soviet Union carries out the largest artillery bombardments since World War I. And I had to Google, like, what is artillery bombardments? It's just, like, air missile attacks, air bombing, air raidings. But it was the largest bombing since World War I. And they bombed, like, all over Finland. And then the Soviet troops overran Finnish defenses on the Karelian Isthmus. With its forces low on ammunition and their soldiers are on the brink of exhaustion, Finland agrees to peace terms the following month with the Soviet Union. So the Winter War lasted 105 days, and when they're signing this treaty with the Soviet Union, Stalin forces Finland to give up 11% of its territory to the Soviet Union, which included the entire province of Karelia. But the country still remained independent. However, pretty much every citizen who was living in the province of Karelia evacuated. They chose to evacuate. They're like, we don't want to be here when the Soviets come. So that was 10% of Finland's population that was all of a sudden displaced. So there was a lot of like homelessness problems after, which is really tragic. And okay, so casualties from the Winter War. So even though it was only 3 months of fighting, the Soviet Union had 300,000 casualties, which is a lot. That's a lot of casualties.
Especially if they only had 500,000 people.
Yeah, that's a lot. And then Finland had 65,000, which, like, is a lot less than the Soviet Union. But if you factor in, like, a percentage of population, it's still, like, a huge amount. And so the Soviet Union, like, even though they won, they still failed pretty miserably, and it was really embarrassing. And this, like, their failed performance in Finland is often seen as one of the factors in Hitler's decision to invade Soviet Union in June 1941, because he was like, wow, they lost to Finland. Even though they won, they're like, they didn't do good with Finland, so I think I'll win if I go. So
yikes.
That was war number 2. So this ends in 1940, and they're like, yay, Winter War is over.
This has been an episode of How Did We Not Know That?
If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
You can also follow us on all social media, including YouTube, at How Did We Not Know That?
If you thought our podcast was low quality, we know. We thought so too. Help us improve the podcast by contributing to our Patreon.
Thank you for listening, and see you guys next week.
Hi everyone, this is part 2 of the Russo-Finnish War series, so if you haven't checked out part 1, be sure to do that. Enjoy! In 1941, Germany attacks the Soviet Union. Hitler invades Soviet Union. And Finland knew they would eventually have to choose a side. There's no way that like they would be able to remain neutral, because even if they said like, oh, we don't want to take part in this, either Germany or the Soviet Union would like forcefully occupy them. So they're like, okay, we actually have to choose a side. And so this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because maybe like if you don't know too much about Finland's history and the circumstances at the time, it's really easy to judge Finland for this decision. But basically, they had to choose between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. And they decided that they couldn't side with the Soviet Union after the Winter War because of everything they fought for, because of their fear of communism, and they were just really, they didn't trust Stalin. They really thought that, okay, they would help the Soviet Union and then Stalin would never give them their independence again. And so, even though they didn't agree with Nazi Germany at all, they saw it as the least awful of several bad choices. So Finland decides to side with Germany in World War II, which is really interesting because like a lot of people will like be really quickly label them as an Axis country. So it's like Italy, Japan, Germany, and then Finland. And you're like, what? Why is Finland here? And Finland described themselves as quote unquote co-belligerents, not as allies with Germany. So they're kind of like, okay, reluctantly siding with them. And the rest of the world pretty much saw Finland as a traitor. Stalin put a lot of pressure on Britain to declare war on Finland. So Britain did. Britain ended up declaring war on Finland, but they only bombed like a remote area of Finland once. Like they weren't actually upset with Finland. They were just like, okay, technically we have to like fight you now. Yeah, a lot of people, and then another factor in like Finland's choice is that a lot of people really thought Germany would win against the Soviet Union, especially because of the Winter War. They were like, wow, they struggled against Finland, like, okay, Germany will take them easily. But that is not what happened at all. Germany failed miserably with their invasion of the Soviet Union, and that was like part of Hitler's downfall and everything. Also, something that's very important to mention is that Finland refused to turn over any Finnish Jews to Germany. So, because Germany did request that, and they did refuse to do that. So on June 21st, 1945, Germany attacks the Soviet Union, and Finland's like, we're neutral for now. But then 4 days later, the Soviet Union bombs Finland, and that gives Finland the opportunity to declare war on the Soviet Union. So now this is the second time they're going to war with the Soviet Union. And this time, it's only a few years later, and they're still like trying to build themselves up. But this time, Finland mobilized 1/6 of its entire population to work directly in war efforts. And this is actually the largest percentage of any country in the world during World War II. Like they had the largest percentage of their population working towards war efforts. So in order to get a better understanding, it would be the same as if today the US reinstituted a draft and built an army of 50 million people. It would be like the same percentage. So it's like a lot. And they were recruiting people of all ages, like young and old, and both genders, so all genders. So they're like literally anyone and everyone has to fight.
Wow.
Yeah. And so at the beginning of World War II, the Soviet Union is preoccupied with Germany's attack. And so Finland took back the Karelia province. And they also controversially expanded into the Soviet side of Karelia, even though they were like, oh, we're just here to take what's ours back. But they also were like, no, actually, we're just going to get a little bit more of your territory. And then after this, like, honestly, nothing much happens for 3 years between Finland and the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union is a lot more focused on Germany and the rest of the world. So, and Finland's also like, we really just wanted our province back, like, so for 3 years, they're kind of just, I don't want to say chilling, but like, nothing crazy happens. But then in June 1944, towards the end of World War II, the Soviet Union relaunches their attack on the Karelian Isthmus. And the Soviet Union attack eventually like peters out. And Finland had like the same goal of just trying to make the fight as long and painful as possible. In 1944, the Soviet Union tries one more time to gain control over the Karelian Isthmus. And the Finnish were like, yay, we're going to do it this one more time. Just make it as long and painful as possible. And the Soviet Union is like, their attack kind of peters out at the end because they're already fighting against Germany. They've been fighting for so long, and it's been a long war, and they're like, okay, like, whatever. So, basically, after the war kind of restabilizes in July 1944, peace talks resume between the Soviet Union and Finland, because they're both like, we just want to be done with this. And the Soviet Union still has the upper hand because their army is still bigger even after they fought Germany. And their territorial demands were pretty much the same as they were in 1941. They took back Finnish Karelia and then another naval base. And Finland had to drive out all 200,000 German troops that had been stationed in there. They let these troops come in, and it was they just mainly used Finland as like a transportation route. So yeah, they kicked out all the German troops, and the Soviet Union made Finland prosecute all of their wartime government leaders. So the Finnish president during the war, like, had to go to jail, and like his defense minister, foreign minister, like, they all had to go to jail. Even though, like, the people still supported them, they were just like, okay, we have to send you to jail. Sorry.
Oh, wow. In order to get peace, the Soviet Union said put them... Oh, wow.
Yeah, okay. The Soviet Union's like, you gotta lock them up. And then, this was crazy, the Soviet Union was like, also, you guys have to pay us $300 million over the next 6 years. They're like, you owe us money for
the
everything,
war, yeah.
For the war. So, like, Finland at the time is super poor. Their country has been completely, like, turned upside down from the Civil War, Winter War, Continuation War, and now they're like, okay, also you have to give us all this money. So that kind of is what fuels one of the reasons, like, why today, like, now if you look at Finland today, they're one of the richest countries in the world. And after World War II, like, they had no other choice but to kind of, like, industrialize and just become richer, and yeah, trade more. So this is kind of why Finland is why it is today. The money that they spent to pay back their war debts to the Soviet Union, like, the government raised taxes, and, like, the people were like, they supported it. They're like, oh, we should all chip in to pay for this debt. And, like, people were, like, giving up, like, their jewelry and, like, all their, like, expensive things. Like, people would donate it to the government, and they were like, please, like, use this to repay the war debt. Because this war against Soviet Union had, like, unified the country so much that, like, they were just so, it really made them, like, they were fighting for their independence this whole time, and so they're, like, fighting to keep their, like, culture and their language, because also the Finnish language is so unique, and, like, so it's really, like, not crazy, but it's really interesting to see, like, they just went from a civil war, and then now they're, like, one of the most, like, unified, nations in the world. They're very, like, patriotic. So, yeah, it's interesting to see how quickly that changed. So then they repay the debt, and then, so after this war, Finland has to sit down and, like, be like, okay, we need to reconsider how we look at relations with the Soviet Union. So this is what I'm, like, really interested in, like, when it comes to, like, foreign policy strategy, because before, Finland's stance was to pretty much just, like, ignore the Soviet Union and hope they forgot about Finland. But, like, they're a small and weak country with no outside help. So they were like, no matter what, we're going to have to stay on good terms with the Soviet Union at all costs. Like, we can't afford another conflict with them. So we're just going to have to be, like, not friends, but just be like, have a good relationship. So they believed that in order to understand the Soviet Union's like perspective, they had to communicate with them frequently. So basically there were 2 presidents following World War II that made such a significant impact on Finnish foreign policy, especially with relations with the Soviet Union. And so their names, I am 1000% about to butcher them. The first one is President Paasikivi, and the second one is President Kekkonen, but I just Google it. I don't know how to pronounce it. They were really close with Stalin. They were both fluent in Russian, and they visited him frequently, and they were just like really friendly with him. And like Stalin even made a remark one time. Someone asked him like, why don't you just like occupy Finland and like set up a communist government there? Because they were doing that in all these other Baltic countries, you know. And then Stalin was like, why would I need to install a puppet government there when I have like my 2 friends, you know? He was
wow.
So like it's really important. Like this is one of the reasons why they remained an independent country. And additionally, on top of this, like as long as there was a conflict with the Soviet Union, Finland would be in trouble because they'd have to like declare a side, you know. And so because of this, Finland becomes really active in peacekeeping around the world. And like today, they're really active in that as well. And this is the root, like this is why this is their motivation, is like, we just need everyone to like be happy. So like, please. And yeah, we also see odd changes in Finland, which if you didn't understand Finland's history, you would think it would be sketchy. But so the first one is like those 2 presidents I mentioned earlier, they chose not to step down after the usual term limit. Between the 2 of them, they served like 35 years, which is a lot, like, because they're a democracy. But they were like, hey, we're not going to step down. But that's because they were handling Soviet relations so well, and the people like really supported them, and they really wanted them to stay in power because they're like, you're doing a good job, like let's not change anything. But then
were they co-presidents or was it sequential?
Yeah, it was sequential. One of them passed away. Like one of them was his like VP or like his foreign minister or something like that. But they were really close to each other, and then one of them passed away, and then the other one assumed power. Okay. But yeah, and then additionally, Finnish newspaper and other media sources, they practice voluntary censorship in regards to the Soviet Union. So they kind of like agreed. There was no law or like any government influence. It was just all the newspapers kind of agreed like, we really can't mess anything up, so we're just going to not say anything bad about the Soviet Union and just try not to talk about them in our press. Which if you didn't understand their reasoning for that, it could seem like, oh my gosh, like they have these long-serving public leaders and they're censoring themselves. That's so sketchy, but they really didn't have a choice. Like, unfortunately, the way I organize my notes, like, we're gonna end on a sad note, but okay. So I covered 2 wars between Finland and the Soviet Union. The first was the Winter War before World War II, and then World War II, but they also call it the Continuation War. So the total death toll, like, between both of those wars for Finland, that was a weird sentence. So for both of these wars combined, the total death toll was 100,000 people for Finland. So 100,000 people died. Which for like an American, that might not seem like a crazy number, but 100,000 people was 2% of their population of 3.7 million. And that's basically the same as if 9 million Americans were killed today. Like, that's the same percentage, right?
Wow, that's terrible.
Right. So 9 million Americans. Think about that. That's almost 10 times the total number of American deaths in all the wars of our 244 years of history. So that's how many people died in these wars in Finland. So it's extremely tragic. There were so many people who were left widowed. So many kids were left orphaned, and they were sent to Sweden because they had no family left in Finland. And, like, it's just really, really awful.
That puts it in perspective. I'm glad you included the ratios.
Yeah, because, it's hard for us to, like, picture that. But Finland's got a really small population. So it was just a huge amount of people. And today, like, Finland remembers... Like, it has a huge effect on the country today in their foreign policy strategy, just on the way they remember history, the way they see the rest of the world, because they were abandoned, like, by everyone and all of their allies.
Yeah.
But they did, like, they fought an incredible fight, and yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's interesting. I had no idea about the history of Finland, so that's really cool. And now I think of them a little separate from the rest of Scandinavia. I wonder what the unifying factor is with the rest of Scandinavia now.
Yeah, I thought, it was just I learned so many things when I was reading about this, and it really made me, like, look at Eastern Europe and Scandinavia a lot differently, and made me think about, like, oh, why do I have such strong biases against this region? Like, why do I think this way? But
definitely. Yeah, no, that was so great. Thank you so much for covering this topic and giving us some information on a conflict between Finland and Russia. Well, not Russia, sorry, Soviet Union. That's like, never heard of this before, so it's so good that you chose to cover this.
Yeah, well, thanks everyone for listening. Hope you guys learned something. And All right. Bye.
This has been an episode of How Did We Not Know That?
If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
You can also follow us on all social media, including YouTube, at How Did We Not Know That?
If you thought our podcast was low quality, we know. We thought so too. Help us improve the podcast by contributing to our Patreon.
Thank you for listening, and see you guys next week.